Hello, hello. This is Julia Wahl in her podcast How to Live. And today I have the pleasure of being in conversation with Hannah Gilbert, Dr. Hannah Gilbert, who is a person of many talents because I've read, Hannah, that you specialize in anthropology. You have your bachelor's in anthropology. You have your PhD in sociology. And your doctoral research explored narratives of spiritual experience in the British spirit mediumship community. So that's very exciting. And you also spent 3 years as a psychiatric support worker during your undergraduate degree. And you've recently returned to working in mental health, having qualified in integrative psychotherapy, and you now work for the Compassionate Mind Foundation. And the name Gilbert, it's because of your parents,
Yeah.
Paul. And I should say that I had the undeniable pleasure of also meeting your mother, Jean. So both of your parents who are great educators. So you come from that inspiring background. Hannah, is there anything else we should know about you? Any recent activities? Any recent hobbies?
Oh, interesting. I think that was a great introduction. Yes, so yeah, my background really, is in anthropology, and I've always had an interest in anthropology and kind of cross-cultural approaches. But yes, as you said, I trained as a psychotherapist a few years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
until a couple of months ago, I was teaching training integrative psychotherapists at the University of Roehampton in London. I've just kind of moved on from that lectureship, so that's been really kind of fascinating new insight into the world of
Mm.
psychotherapy. Yes, hobbies are the usual: reading, listening to music, walks in the countryside, that kind of thing.
So why so many different topics?
Mm.
Anthropology, sociology. How do so? Maybe my question is about why the integration, and how do you integrate these various topics?
That's a great question. Something I'm really kind of have been interested in, continue to be interested in. So, yeah, I mean, I discovered anthropology when I was about 16. My mum did a research methods module and was taught by an anthropologist at the University of Derby, and she came back and told me all about it. And I thought, oh yeah, that's what I'm interested in, because I've always been interested in people. So then I went off when I was 18 to study anthropology, and I think it really emphasized the diversity of the world and the diversity of human
Mm,
experience. And I've always been fascinated in how differences between people and how people kind of make sense of things, and they talk about things, and just the nature of human experience really. But obviously being brought up
mm,
within a psychology household, I've always been interested in psychology. So there's been, I think, in some ways, a sort of a natural sort of convergence of these sort of different things. And I know
mm,
within kind of psychology and psychotherapy, there is a really well established kind of cross-cultural, transcultural area that is gradually now becoming more embraced, I think, by the mainstream. So I think this kind of gets into thinking about, how we integrate,
mm,
and how we can sort of, because people have been curious about what it is to be a human for quite some time now, and
mm,
have had different ways of sort of trying to answer those questions. So it makes sense, doesn't it, that we kind of look at all the different ways in which we've tried to answer those questions and see where they kind of converge and what different ways of thinking can influence us. I think I'm a bit of a magpie in some ways. I kind of like picking up things, and
mm,
my interest gets here, and my interest, sometimes a bad thing, but usually it's kind of how does this fit together, and how does that, what does that say about that, and I'm going to look there to find out more about that. And but certainly psychotherapy has become more integrative. I mean, they'd say now that integrative
mm,
practitioners are
mm,
most, well, maybe not most, but quite a significant number of people would say that they were integrative rather than belonging to a
mm,
particular school or approach. I think within psychotherapy, it tends to be, when we talk about integration, it tends to be that we're looking at psychotherapeutic theory. So a common way of which I'm sure you know, Julia, is of assimilative integration, where we have a foundation and then we assimilate different theories to, usually from a practical point about, well, adding to the toolbox is what people say. But I think my interests have been about kind of going beyond psychotherapeutic theory. And I think compassion focused therapy, which is my discipline, really does that. We kind of, it's nice to swim in a little pool, but there is also an ocean out there. And how can we kind of bring in insights from different disciplines? Because there are lots of wonderful connections that we can make.
That's actually my next question. So how may anthropology, for instance, or sociology or any other disciplines contribute to psychotherapy and namely CFT, compassion-focused therapy? So what might be of use when it comes, because your father Paul mentions consilience, so the term coined by Wilson. So how this may be of help in terms of psychotherapy and predominantly CFT?
Yeah, brilliant. So I mean, consilience I think is a wonderful way of integrating, because it's about kind of converging, but it's also about taking things from different disciplines. There's a sense, isn't there, of thinking, that there's so much fruit in all these different ways of trying to make sense of what it is. The thing is that what we're doing in psychotherapy is that we're encountering this question, aren't we, about what is it to be human, and how do we help people who are suffering. And it's so rooted in human experience. We don't put people in laboratories and test things. It's about, how we learn about people's inner world. So that's very complex. And there are all kinds of things that influence on that. I think we've also seen a shift, haven't we, towards this sense of, that there's something wrong with your brain if you're not well, if you're mentally unwell. There's something gone wrong in your brain, so we need to fix that with medication or etc. But really, and Dad has written about this in Living Like Crazy, that actually the societies that we live in have a huge influence on our mental health. So, and we are social beings. And I think that's coming again, we're talking about that more. We're hugely influenced by our relationships and the environments that we're living in. And I think another thing is we're finding a lot of evidence in a lot of other, so from social geography to history to sociology and anthropology, that they've all been kind of encountering these questions about human suffering and how that's impacted by how and where we live. But I think the thing is that, look, we're social beings that live in the social world, and compassion-focused therapy is it's a compassion-focused approach to therapy, but it can also be a compassion-focused approach to living. And I think what's been interesting is that, obviously we have, compassion-focused therapy as a psychotherapeutic model, but there's also compassionate mind training, which is part of that. But we're seeing that more kind of used with kind of impersonal practice. So, sorry, just going back to your question about, the influence on CFT. I think the thing about CFT is that it was always a conciliant integration. It wasn't. It was always about trying to bring together different things. And if we look at evolutionary theory, for example, that's always been influenced by paleontology and biology and all kinds of things. So it's always been trying to kind of bring different things together, so that we have more knowledge to sort of build on.
So what are the influences, the main influences in CFT, for instance, the pluralistic influences, which I find particularly interesting, or any other influences that might be of importance, Hannah?
Oh, that's brilliant. So mainly, obviously, I mean, there's, psychotherapy and psychology, of course, but there's always been a strong influence of evolutionary theory and neuroscience. So I think one of the things that's really interesting about CFT, well, many things, obviously, is, that it's not strictly a talking therapy. Because we're also trying to, we bring in a lot of experiential practice that are designed to try and stimulate different, kind of physiological shifts, different mind states. My dad has always been kind of a brain state theorist, was interested in that. And things like, developed social mentality theory. So there's been a kind of a strong influence of kind of neuroscience and evolutionary theory, but also in kind of Buddhist practices of mindfulness. I mean, there's such a rich tradition there of how we recognizing that the mind can be quite problematic. So how can we work with the mind in a way that's kind of, how can we better understand our minds? And they've drawn a lot from kind of Buddhist and mindfulness practice. And attachment theory, for example, plays quite a significant role in CFT. So there's all those kind of, but I think anthropology as well, because that's always kind of my interest, is because, we're different, we understand things differently, we experience, we talk about the meanings that we ascribe to certain things are different. And I mean, from my own kind of original work in anthropology and sociology, I was thinking about religious and spiritual experiences. And I was really interested in kind of well-being in regards to that. And I've always been kind of fascinated by kind of spirits and those sorts of beliefs. But, in a lot of societies, people have this really, a very kind of particular system about how the living and the dead effectively relate to each other. And there are all kinds of rituals and practices that are often socially, they're often social rituals that are kind of designed to kind of help people navigate particular difficulties or challenges in a way that's also about connecting with the community.
So do you think psychotherapy should be spiritual? Because there is an ongoing discussion about that.
Yeah, I think that depends on what you mean by spiritual. And again, I think the thing is that spirituality means different things for different people. And that's such a great question. I've been kind of thinking about that. And you're right, there is more. I've been reading some papers recently that have talked about kind of soulfulness and bringing a soulfulness into psychotherapy. I think one thing you often kind of encompass quite deep existential issues about what the meaning of life is. And I think inevitably that can feel as though it has a kind of a spiritual connotation. There's something very deeply meaningful about, what's the meaning of life, and compassion does really kind of tap into that. But there's also something about how we relate to other people. And I think some people would see that there's a spiritual, again, gets into complex issues, isn't it? About what do we mean by the spirit? So it's a really interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Julia?
Well, I think it is about meaning, essentially. So, what is important for us? What is it that we want to be cultivating? That's how I would personally define spirituality. But again, as you were saying, there are many different ways of approaching it. So for me, it's mainly about the meaning that I attach to whatever I do in my life.
I think that's a brilliant way. That's a brilliant way of discussing. There's something about meaning, something about that's more than just existing. It's more than just that has, and again, a lot of societies that their spirituality is really rooted in the community, in our sense of who we are in connection with, with our fellows. And I think there's also, potentially we're tapping into kind of moral, how can I live a moral life, a life of compassion that is about being a compassionate citizen as well as a compassionate individual.
And there's this research conducted by Nikki Harif from New Zealand, and she actually confirms what we're saying in CFT, that people want to be good. So it's the other narrative. So because the usual narrative is that we're selfish, Milton Friedman, it's all about your well, we're doing things for our own benefit, but actually we want to be good. So acting in a way that's good, and what gives us happiness is meaning. So if we were to define yet another tricky term, happiness, some people would consider it to be about meaning, so it's not about how I'm, feeling. That might not necessarily be the most important thing, but the meaning that I ascribe to my different activities. So even if at times I'm not feeling it. So again, it's similar to compassion. I don't have to feel it at all times. I have to, it's about doing, rather than feeling something. And of course, these days it's about feeling good. Well, I don't necessarily have to feel good about even making a cup of tea for my beloved, but I do it anyway. And then I feel better about it, and the other person, of course.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And, that there's things that I think that we sometimes at risk of forgetting, I think, within a very individualistic culture is about being of value and being valued, of this of having a reciprocal relationship with people where we're caring for each other. And as you say, there is also, absolutely. Sometimes you don't want to get up and make your partner or your parent or child, you'd rather stay in bed. But it's the meaning of what that is. I mean, and that's, something that's important about compassion is that it's not, it's about doing, I hesitate to say right, because I think that's always very tricky, but, it's, that's why one of the things about compassion is it's not always for people that we love and we like. Sometimes actually it's being fair, being to people, because it's I find it difficult to put into words, but it is about meaning and about kind of playing your part. But the thing that you were saying about that we're innately selfish is it is so important, actually, Julia. I think that you kind of raised that, because it's a very strong sense that I think, particularly within Western society, I see it a lot in British society. There's a sort of sense that is our natural state, and that's used to justify an awful lot of stuff. When really, I mean, if you look at Penny Spicken's work, is what looked at compassion in Neanderthal societies, there's actually a lot of evidence suggests that they were compassionate. They found fossils of Neanderthals who couldn't possibly have survived on their own. They must have been cared for by their community. So, as you say, that people kind of want to be. So one of the questions then that I think that compassion-focused therapy and a compassion-focused approach is really interested in is, okay, so what turns that on or turns that off in people? So you want to be, okay, I think, I want to be, I would rather be good than bad. I think most people would agree with that. So why am I not? What kind of turns off my ability to be compassionate to others?
So what does the research say? Because I don't think it's even particularly true that we're selfish and only focus on ourselves within our weird communities. So Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. What do you know about what turns it on and off, Hannah?
That's a great point. I think this is an area I think that's still really ripe for research. I think there's a lot to be done around process and looking at things that inhibit and things that facilitate. One of the interesting, when they look at research with children, what was quite, I don't know if you know James Kirby's work with the stickers and gaining stickers, is that children naturally seem to be, they'll be cooperative unless there's a cost to them. So so there's something about it. If you're going to take something, if I have to give up something, that's a little bit, that's a bit difficult. This is why I guess this kind of gets back to the concilium point in a way, because I think we really need to be mindful of the societies that we're living in, the kind of messages that they perpetuate. What do we believe to be true based on the societies in which what messages are we given? And,
mm,
one of the kind of very worrying things that's in kind of, well, in a lot of different countries, but obviously I'm in Britain, so I notice it. We're having a big debate about, how we should treat asylum seekers. So how we should treat
mm.
the
Oh
most
yeah.
vulnerable people in the world. And
Mm,
one of the things that our government are pushing is the fact that, well, no, we haven't got space. We haven't got space for them. We can't look
mm,
after them. We're going to take them somewhere else because, they're effectively they're a parasite, really, and we can't look after
mm.
them. So how, and that's, I mean, I could get very passionate about that. That's a terrible way of being.
Go for it, Hannah. Go for it.
Yeah, yes. I mean, but there's something about that that's we don't see. We're talking about boats, right? We're not talking about
Mm,
people, and a lot of people have raised that point. So it's easier,
mm,
isn't it, to talk in a more distanced way about boats than it is about people. And I
mm,
think that certain kind of media outlets are very good at doing that because they are
mhm,
trying to encourage you to think about that in a particular way. So there's, the important thing is, how do we end up not seeing people as
mm,
people and seeing them as things
mm,
that,
mm,
that almost are just, it's all, I mean, the language feels they were talking about kind of moving boxes around. Oh, I don't want these boxes on my doorstep. I'm going to send them down the road. These are people, and what you find sneaking into that to justify it is,
mm,
oh no, but there's loads of these criminals on these, they're just criminals that
mm,
they just want to come in and
mm,
have a free ride, that they're actually going to come and mess up, they're all from these criminal
mm,
gangs, and the vast majority of them, and blah 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 blah. And so, and people use that kind of justification to say you shouldn't have
mm,
compassion for these people because they're actually bad people.
mm,
It's very dangerous, I think. But there's a
mm,
lot, I mean, that this had devastating consequences throughout history of how we've kind of dehumanized or just kind of seen people as
mm,
objects rather than as
mm,
people. So there's what stops us from being able to empathize with people and see them as these kind of,
mm,
I think there's a lot to be
mm.
explored around how we can kind of stop that.
Is it about dissociating from our own pain and suffering because it's just too much to handle? And once we can understand the function of that, we can also de-shame ourselves and actually become more exposed, being more willing to
Mm.
be vulnerable to the pain of others.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, Julia. I think that's a really
Mm,
important point, isn't it?
mm,
And that's something I think that, because we're living in,
mm,
if we think about when we're living in cities are
mm,
huge. We're surrounded by
mm,
people, and we're also being told all the time that we're overcrowded. So you
mm,
can't get to see a GP because we're overcrowded.
mm,
Not that, of course, the GP is underfunded, of course. Um, so I think that we're living in a increasingly in a world of overwhelm, and
mm,
I really felt that during the pandemic because it felt
mm,
constantly that the threat was being pumped at you for, all
mm,
these, this and this, and you know and people became a threat. People were
mm,
seen as potentially as a threat. um and yeah, I think it is, there's something about, that something has broken my ability to be empathic with
mm,
you, that I am,
mm,
and I think you make a really important point here about actually we're very
mm,
desensitized from our own suffering.
mm,
And I think one of
mm,
the common things that I hear a lot actually is the sense of, well, I had it very hard and nobody helped me, so you just have to get on
mm,
with it. They've got it, they have it too
mm,
soft. It's too soft. I
mm,
did it. I worked hard.
mm,
And you can hear the pain in that sometimes. And rather than me, I said, yeah, actually, if I'd had more support, it would have been better for me, actually. And
mm,
so I kind of want to try and offer that for other. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of people do have
mm,
that kind of a psychology that, actually, I want to make an easier path for my children or my
mm,
community. But there's also a real kind of sense of, but that's just the way that it is. That's just the way that it is.
mm,
That kind of you cuts it.
mm. But maybe educating or psychoeducating people about our responses. For instance, I have to admit to being ashamed of my empathy. And by that, I mean, if there's a person from, let's call it a tribe, for lack of a better word, and this person is being attacked by a person from a different tribe, I become very protective. So that's my empathy, and I want to retaliate. I want to, I'm not acting in a way that's very compassionate, because again, compassion is about going beyond your own tribe, your own group of interest, whatever that group is about. So understanding these mechanisms actually might be the-shaming, and maybe being more aware of how we respond. And that's, at times, it's not our fault, as well your father would say, but but it is our responsibility.
Mm. Yeah, people get
Mm,
caught on that. It's sometimes they forget
mm,
that it's your responsibility. It's like, oh well,
mm,
you can just do
mm,
whatever you like. Well, no, but
mm,
I think you make such an important here about if shame gets
mm,
involved,
mm,
because what happens is that we
mm,
want to defend ourselves, and I think the thing about it is that, I mean, your example is a brilliant one. I think most of us can relate to that. If a friend is in,
mm,
go to the defense of the friend,
mm.
and
Yeah.
there's a compassion. It's a compassionate intention. I want to protect my friend,
Mm, mm,
but and we know that lots of studies have shown that in-group compassion is a lot easier for most of us than out-group compassion. We do
mm,
have in-group biases,
mm,
and I think that's at the root of a lot of
mm,
problems in the world. So we do really need to recognize and train ourselves.
mm,
And I think that the thing about it's not my fault is that our brains are hardwired to do this.
mm,
It's not,
mm,
that's why it's very easy to kind of fly to the defense
mm,
of a friend. It's
mm,
exactly, it's not our fault. And I think we get caught up in this, oh, I'm a bad person, or I should be like this. And then we're
mm,
just looking inward all the time. And because we need to kind of be able to step out of those kind of loops. I think, okay, what do I need to learn
mm,
about this situation? Actually, what's the
mm,
wisdom here? And that's what's really important in
mm,
therapy. And again, one of many things I love is that, it's also about, what if I was at my wisest, what would my decision be? How can I kind of step
mm,
above and see the whole, and be able to say, do you know what? The people in the other group, they're just like me.
mm,
Just as I want to
mm,
rush to defend my friends, so do they. So how
mm,
do we kind of be able to see the overview of that? And that we're all caught up with these tricky brains firing off and getting
mm.
activated.
I,
And
I think it boils down to what Fran Lebowitz was saying, that we are so childish. And by childish, I mean we end up voting for the politicians whom we like. And I shouldn't be voting for the people I like. I should be voting for the people who are competent enough to do their job right. So again, compassion is not about loving other people. If that happens, that's wonderful. And we should also have these kind of experiences. But it's I don't need to love you or even like you. I need to be able to collaborate with you, even if I might not necessarily like you for, and doesn't matter why that is, because we just have different preferences, like our likes and dislikes, and sometimes we just don't care about certain type of people.
mm,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, let's be
yeah,
honest about that. Let's not pretend that where we laugh or are invested, interested in every single individual.
mm,
Uh, but it's about even though I might not necessarily like you, I can still see how competent you are, how helpful you are in certain situations to a certain people, and I might want to support you.
yes,
So
absolutely.
that's different from this constant narrative of loving the whole world. I don't think that's necessarily possible, and it's like a child, wishing that the whole world would be perfect, and
Yeah,
not being able to understand that our parents might be good and bad, because at
yeah.
times they say yes to us and at times they say no to us.
I mean, yes, again, I want to just nod and nod and nod listening to you. I completely
Mm,
agree. I think, and also being able to tolerate the fact that actually we can have complex feelings for people.
mm,
I can love
mm,
you, and I can also be kind of annoyed with you. And I think sometimes
Mm,
that's, or there are or more shifts, or as you say, like, I can respect you, but I'm not sure I want to go
mm,
for a drink with you because we just don't get on,
mm,
But and I
mm,
think this is a really important point here because,
mm,
having compassion for people that you don't like or that you kind of or you might
mm,
judge. And I think, looking at the amazing
mm,
work that's being done in forensic settings, I mean, working with people who
mm,
I think many of us might really struggle with the things that they've, on a personal, that
mm,
judgment comes up or whatever, but
mm,
being able to
mm,
see what's behind, being able to see the vulnerability, and
mm,
talking about this a lot with students, because of course, they're one of the things that you kind of talk about is, well, what kind of clients might you find difficult to work with and things. And,
mm,
that if you get stuck in that, whether I like you or not,
mm, mhm,
but you have to be able to see the fuller picture of the person. And there's often
mm,
most of us carry a lot of pain and we carry our
mm,
tragic stories, and
mm,
being able to see that, recognize people in
mm,
their richness is important, but also that doesn't mean that we then condone. So I was thinking about, compassion for
mm.
Trump, which is a challenge for me, I must confess. But I could have compassion for Trump in that, it sounds as from
Mm,
what I've read about him, as that's a
mm,
tricky, that's a tricky life that he had in many ways. Yes, affluence and all
mm,
that kind of stuff, but there's the and you think, if that didn't happen to you, maybe things would be different.
mhm,
I mean, Matthew Ricard
mhm,
says a lot about this, that actually the compassion is that I wish that the suffering in you wasn't there, because
mm,
maybe,
mm,
but at the same time, that doesn't mean that I think Trump actually is potentially very harmful. And that doesn't mean that we
mm,
shouldn't stand against and say, do you know what?
mm,
No,
mm,
no, we need to kind of make a stand
mm,
against that, because people,
mm,
that's an important distinction. It doesn't mean just about letting people, being nice. And sometimes you have to make a stand against harm.
mhm, mm, mm. So what does compassion mean to you, Hannah? And
Mm.
how did it all start? Of course, they're your parents, but how about your personal journey? Let's call it.
That's a lovely question. Yeah, I mean, I was born into it, Julia. I mean, I was there when, as a young girl, when, and it was. I mean, but also, I mean, I can't, there's no denying that my background's had a huge influence. I mean, I've always had a really
Mm,
kind of close relationship with my father, and we've, especially as I got
mm,
into academia, we've talked a
mm,
lot. We talk a lot about things
mm,
and debate and, share our
mm,
papers and things. And he was really encouraging of my he's always been encouraging whatever I wanted to do, but and also kind of was really interested in my kind of anthropology, because he was, oh,
mm,
that's a new insight, it's a new
mm,
um and he used to have
mm,
meetings occasionally in the house when my brother and I were growing up, bringing together people who were involved in evolutionary psychiatry and
mm,
psychology. It comes to that. So that was a
mm,
kind of really, and seeing those, people coming together and talking has kind of
mm,
had a, it's something I would really
mm,
like to kind of
yeah.
create, I think, going forward.
Mm,
Um, so kind of being around all of those kind of ideas. But I think there's
mm,
also a sense of, I've always liked, I always like people, if that makes sense. I mean, not like in that kind of wishy-washy, I love the world stuff.
mm,
I'm not that
mm,
like that. But I've always been interested in people. And I think from a young age, I've always
mm,
been quite impacted by people. I can remember being quite young and feeling
mm,
very moved by people's suffering, maybe a little bit. That's
mm,
why I didn't kind of go in
mm,
psychotherapy very early on,
mm,
because I think some
mm.
of us need to be able to learn how to tolerate how people's distress affects us. Because if we get
I think
along,
that was
yeah, sorry, go on.
wise of you. That was really
Yeah.
wise of you, I think.
So, because you can feel that, and you need to kind of learn about what that is and
Mm,
how to work with it and things. But
mm,
I think that, and I think from studying societies, that just the compassion is in all kinds of different ways, but is in so much of
mm,
the fabric of human society. It often gets lost.
mm,
I don't want to romanticize
mm,
things, because I think
mm,
and I think a powerful point of CFT is that we have a dark side. And maybe there's also
mhm,
part of that when you see what people can do to
mm,
each other, and
mm,
how can we kind of,
mm,
well, what's all the what's how can we work with that?
mm,
But I think it kind of gets back to a point that you made this really well about meaning. It's about,
mm,
a deep connection to. other people and about really wanting
mm,
and what I think there's something important about meaning in your life is I'd want to make a contribution in some way.
mm,
But I believe it, and the more I've kind of learned about compassion, and I believe in it. I believe that's a way to be. I believe in
mm,
meeting people with compassion and treating people with compassion,
mm,
and trying to kind of understand our minds. And yes, I mean it's an ongoing journey, as I think it is for all of us, really. But
mm,
it has a gravitas of meaning. I think that's really
mm,
gets beyond a lot of our
mm,
superficial,
mm,
commodity fetishism of the
mm,
modern age. It's
mm.
kind of grounded in a real kind of human to humanness.
Mm. Let's let's be honest about it. It's not always easy.
Mm,
At times, it is a bit of a challenge, but
mm,
at the same time, it does give you meaning and maintains your supports your motivation. So it's
yeah.
both.
And that's
uh,
but that's
mm,
really important. It isn't, and I think again
mm,
that you've kind of sort of spoken about so brilliantly is yeah, we don't always act. We'll come out of situations and think, oh my goodness,
mm,
what happened there?
mm,
That I don't want to
yeah.
say that. Why did I
Mm,
do that? We're not
mm,
perfect. We don't get it.
mm, mm,
And life is messy, and another thing that's important is thinking about the environments that we live in, and I think rather than
mm,
am I a deeply good person or a deeply bad person, it's well,
mm,
the environments bring out one or the other,
mm,
bring out different textures
mm,
of who we are. But it is, I mean, and working with people's pain on a regular basis is
mm,
difficult, and I think the more aware you are of
mm,
what's going on in the world, it's difficult. Um,
mm.
but and that's why you need courage. That's why courage is an important part
Mm,
of it's a really important
mm,
part of compassion. It's not all about kind of nicey, gentle
mhm,
stuff. It can be a part of it, sure. I think, a lot of us benefit from a bit
mm,
of gentleness in our lives, but it is also
mm,
about courage and about having, making a choice about the kind of life that you want to
mm,
live.
mm. And wisdom, as you
Yeah.
yourself mentioned. And I would also like to ask you about the future of therapy, not only CFT, but also CFT. And
Mm.
how would you like to see it evolve? So
Mm.
both psychotherapy in general and CFT in particular.
Brilliant. And I mean, I think it's a brilliant question, but also I think it's
Mm,
important to ask ourselves these questions on a regular basis,
mm,
because I think we need to have a view to the future. Because sometimes you
mm,
get very overwhelmed by stuff, and I think we need to be
mm,
able to see a path forward. Yes, it's hard to
mm,
walk, and there are times when we feel exhausted and I can't be
mm,
asked, or more overwhelmed. I think
mm,
can't be asked, but we need to be able to think, right, where am I going? What can I contribute
mm,
to? Little steps. So
mm,
yeah, psychotherapy generally, that's a tricky one. I think that there are we need to have better funding in mental health care. I think that was without a doubt.
mm,
It needs to be valued, and it needs to be properly supported.
mm,
And because I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of therapists are that they get burnt out by the environments in which they're
mm,
working. With these,
mm,
they can only see people for so long. They've got to get them to this stage at this point. There's targets,
mm,
and they're in very kind of competitive, hostile environments where they feel under
mm,
threat all the time. There's no way you can be the best therapist you can be in that environment. And yet, of course, it's all your fault if it goes wrong. I mean, it's
mm,
terrible. And and we have a big problem with people being on waiting
mm,
lists for 18 months, and people being
mm,
in crisis having nowhere to go. So I think there's some
mm,
really serious attention needs to be given to that. I think therapy naturally has become kind of more, we've learned, we know we're a bit more mindful, I think, of kind of neuroscience influences,
mm,
and I think that's a really
mm,
important thing, actually what's going on physiologically, within our clients during therapy. So we know that. So things like mirror neurons, for example, very useful for therapists to know. Is important. I, I, I have. This is maybe a personal perspective, but slightly anxious about the rise of kind of these sort of text. I know a lot of people are very critical about this, of these kind of text-based therapies, which of course I get that though it fits around your life, but I think something is missed if you're going to do therapy via text message. And this, thing about, well, we'll find you the perfect, if you don't like therapist, blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, sometimes I think it's quite useful because it's about experiencing yourself in relationships. So sometimes it's useful if you don't love your therapist. Sometimes not useful if you do love your therapist. I mean, there needs to be the psychological contact, of course, but this concept that I can find the perfect person for you, but the perfect therapist probably doesn't exist. But I think we lose a lot. That anyway, that's just kind of I get why things try and once you have new technologies, things need to adapt to that, and maybe I'm being a bit dismissive. But I think that probably that becoming more kind of aware of different things is important within psychotherapy generally. But I think we really have got to address, because the fact is that if you want to have long-term therapy, you need to be able to pay for it, and it's quite a lot of money. Within kind of CFT, I mean, this is a really exciting time within psychotherapy, of course, but within CFT, because it's building and building and building. I mean, we've kind of, working at the foundation, I mean, we've grown kind of exponentially, really over quite a short period of time, to thinking about, that there were a few kind of specialist areas. So for Deborah Lee working in trauma, and Ken Goss working in eating disorders, Michelle Cree working in peri and postnatal care, and so there've been some fantastic people who've really kind of spearheaded how it working with kind of different client groups, and that's kind of grown and grown and grown. So now we've got more and more special interest groups. Got, for example, Darcy Harris doing wonderful work on grief, and Charlie Herriot Maitland and psychosis. So it's kind of we're seeing how it works with different kind of groups of people and in different therapies, and so I think that's kind of really. That's really important, and also thinking about kind of international collaboration and grow. One thing that I'm kind of working on at the moment is trying to build an international library of guided practices. So I've been talking to Wendy Wood, obviously, well, about how we can build up our equality, diversity, and inclusivity kind of. So actually, how do we become an international, working internationally in a way that's kind of building community. And seeing, I think, CFT studies in lots of different societies. There's lots and lots of CFT studies being done in Iran, which is really kind of
yes, interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're finding really amazing results, which is really exciting. So I think going forward as well, also better communication between as a global community. That's in academia generally, I think. But it's kind of a case of just building and building and building and seeing where we could benefit from looking at this and looking at this and looking at this.
So are there any particular areas of interest for you personally in that development of CFT?
I think mine mostly being kind of cross-cultural and kind of looking at kind of in understanding CFT and looking at research in different communities. I was really, really inspired by, and I think you were part of this, Julia, in Marcela Matos' study during COVID.
The COVID one.
Yeah. Looking at, and that I think that's a really great example of, that it was about 21, maybe a bit more, a bit less, different representatives from different countries came together, translated the scales and things, and so that we were getting insights from lots of different, which just adds to kind of a richness, really. But I think that I'd love to see more of those kind of projects, of really kind of big international collaborations, bringing in insights from different societies. I mean, I'm a qualitative researcher, so my interest is also in different ways of getting more kind of how do we gain more richness of understanding about phenomenological human experience. I mean, getting people to answer scales is great, that's fine, and it's important, it's an important part, but also kind of having an opportunity to go deeper. What does compassion really mean to people?
But I think by also focusing on the quality work, we can then learn more about the details of these
Absolutely.
experiences.
Absolutely.
But so how about going beyond psychotherapy, Hannah? What would be some areas for you or the foundation that you're part of that'd be of interest?
Yeah, I mean, another
Say
thing is,
politics or
yes,
Mhm,
yeah, absolutely. Because I think that
mhm,
another thing is that we are kind of developing more thinking about kind of a compassion and focused approach to other areas. And I think you
mm,
really recognise, do you know what? Actually,
mm,
politics, social organisation has a massive impact on people's well-being.
mm,
And there's some really
mm,
serious problems in our politics, right?
mm,
There's a lack of compassion.
mm, mm,
So I think what you kind of, the more integrative and maybe a conciliance gives rise to this.
mm,
You
mm,
can't restrict things to just one area. They naturally kind of, if you let them,
mm,
ripple out.
mm,
So there's some wonderful work being done
mm,
on compassion in politics. There's a group, Compassion in Politics,
mm,
run by Matt Hawkins and Jennifer Nadal, who are trying to kind of, look at how we can bring compassion into
mm,
politics more.
mm,
Considering certainly British politics is rather uncompassionate these days. But also we're developing kind of more thinking about compassion organisations. We've got people working in
mm,
compassion in business and leadership, and also
mm,
there's a lot of work that's been done on compassion in education. Um,
mm,
so there's kind of filtering into kind of all different
mm,
areas of social life.
mm, mm, mm. And how about social change? Do you think CFT may be applied to that particular area?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, absolutely. I hope so, because I think that sort of a fight. Compassion is also about, we want to try as best we can
Mm,
to cultivate a
mm,
world that's helpful and not harmful. I mean, the helpful, not harmful kind of motto is at the heart, really, of what can I do that's helpful and not
mm,
harmful. And I think that it has to kind of go in, because I think we're sitting on that point where we know that there are a lot of things that are wrong, right? And that
mm,
actually it doesn't need to. I
mm,
think we're sort of getting over this idea that this is how it is, and thinking, no,
mm,
it doesn't. We can have better. And what's, I think, again,
mm,
just kind of using Britain as an example, what's been kind of really significant is, after World War II, it was, I mean, absolutely traumatized, devastated kind of environment, but there was an impetus then to kind of build back. I think I'm using a Tory phrase,
mm,
but actually trying to improve,
mm,
actually trying to make a better world for our children and our children's
mm,
children,
mm,
partly because we realise how terrible things can get. And that was, it was only a
mm,
few years after the end of World War II that the NHS was developed. It was an
mm,
amazing, we want to have healthcare for everyone, regardless of, you know,
mm,
and that's a very clear motivation, is how
mm,
can I be helpful to my community?
mm,
And that, I think, is at the heart, though, of a lot of social change. Because
mm,
it's recognizing where there are inequalities, where, injustice,
mm,
or on all kinds of different levels. It doesn't need to be like that. So how can we build
mm,
towards a society that is more enriching and more nourishing for
mhm,
people, that has at its
mm,
core motivation is this desire to be helpful. And so, and I think
mm,
social change often has compassion at its heart.
mm,
I'm driven to want to
mm,
make the world better.
mm. So, since this podcast is called How to Live,
Mm.
so how to live according to Hannah Gilbert?
Uh, Interesting question. Yeah. Oh, um, with compassion. No, but I mean that in all
Hmm,
seriousness. Um,
hmm,
yeah, there's all. I think one of the things that I've really got into recently is be curious. I think
hmm,
curiosity is a really important. It's something that we can really cultivate. It's something I, again, tried to kind of encouraging my students and in my client work is being curious. And I guess in a way I found that very liberating. I mean, anthropology is very liberating in the sense that it kind of exposes, God, the world's far more vast than you thought, and that's an exciting thing. And how we tip to, because I think for a lot of people that's not that's a frightening thing. Like I don't, and how we can kind of make it into that we can actually, the world is a place to play and explore and to be enriched by, rather than that actually I've got to batten down the hatches and stay in my little, because the world's a scary place. But I think, and being curious and being kind of humble about, like I don't know, so I'm going to turn to other people to find out. But also kind of, being curious about, I mean, it's like thinking back to the example that you gave about, rushing to defend your friend and against, actually being able to step back from that and be curious about what was going on and be curious about the other person and be open to, kind of follow that through, really. But I think again and again, we're getting back to that, we're hardwired for social connection. And if we deny that, we suffer from it. But, that so how do we kind of put social connecting at our heart of our lives, really? And I'm tempted to get into areas like, say, less social media, but of course, listen to me on that one. Social media could be great, but can also not be great. And again, spending some time in the natural world, going for being able to kind of having mindful moments rather than, I don't think we can't always be in the here and now. I think that's helpful if we are actually, but be, having kind of moments of me, and again also that having meaning in your life, but something that's really deep and really touches you, right, gets in your belly, something that really gives you fire and passion, and usually I think that tends to be, being in relationships and having community.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for that answer. Really inspiring to be in conversation with you. So thank you so much, and I wish you a good life, and of course, wishing our listeners for them to have a good life as well.
Yes.
All the best. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thanks, Julia. That was great. I really enjoyed that.